What if the only witness to a crime was trapped in silence? What if the key to uncovering a deadly secret lay hidden behind closed eyes? And a heartbeat that refused to stop. In a world where power can erase the truth and money can bury the past, one man's life hangs by a thread, and the woman assigned to care for him is about to step into something far beyond her control. What begins as routine becomes personal. What should be impossible starts to feel real. But when the lines between duty and destiny blur, how far would you go to uncover the truth, especially when that truth could destroy you? Stay with this story. What lies beneath the surface is darker, deeper, and far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Rain hammered against the tall glass windows of Westbridge Private Hospital, painting the sterile corridors in shades of grey. Ivy Quinn walked briskly down the hall, heart pounding louder with each step. She had been summoned, urgently, by Dr. Harris, the head of neurology, a man known for his cool detachment and lack of small talk. As she approached the double doors of his office, Ivy wiped her damp palms on her scrubs, straightened her shoulders and knocked. "Come in." The voice was clipped, impatient. Ivy entered. Dr. Harris didn't look up from the file in front of him. His silver-framed glasses perched on the edge of his nose, eyes scanning lines of text with surgical precision. "You're being reassigned," he said flatly. Ivy blinked. "Reassigned, sir? I wasn't aware." "Effective immediately." He pushed the file toward her. "This is a high-profile patient. You'll be his primary nurse until further notice." Ivy opened the file slowly, eyes catching on the name stamped in bold at the top. Knox Wilder. Her breath caught. Everyone in the city knew that name. A billionaire. A corporate shark. A man whispered about in boardrooms and feared across Wall Street. Ruthless. Brilliant. Untouchable. Until he wasn't. Knox Wilder had disappeared from public life a year ago, after a horrific car accident. A crash surrounded by rumors, speculation, and silence. No updates. No press statements. The world had moved on. Apparently, he hadn't. "He's here?" Ivy asked, her voice hushed. Dr. Harris finally looked up. "He has been for months. You'll find him in Suite 9C. A pause. "The family pays well but wants minimal involvement. Your job is to maintain his care and ensure absolute confidentiality. Understand?" Ivy nodded slowly, her pulse racing. "Yes, doctor." As she stepped into the elevator, Ivy felt a strange tightness in her chest. This wasn't just another assignment. It felt different. Heavy. Like the air before a storm. When she reached Suite 9C, she hesitated before opening the door. The room beyond was silent, save for the soft beeping of machines and the rhythmic whoosh of a ventilator. It was spacious, sterile, yet there was something hollow about it, as though time had stopped and forgotten to start again. And there he was. Knox Wilder. Suite 9C was unlike any hospital room Ivy had ever seen. Soft golden light spilled from antique sconces on the walls, casting long shadows across imported furniture and crisp linen curtains. A vase of fresh white lilies stood by the window, likely changed daily by staff under strict orders. The room was elegant. Lavish. Empty. The luxury couldn't hide the truth. It was a cage. Knox Wilder lay at the center of it, unmoving. Ivy stood at the doorway for a long moment, taking him in. He was striking. Even in stillness, there was an undeniable presence about him, like the air itself bent around his form. High cheekbones, a chiseled jaw, and dark lashes that fanned across pale skin. If not for the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, one might mistake him for a statue, perfect, cold, and unreachable. How can someone look so alive, yet be so far gone? She wondered. Ivy stepped closer, her shoes silent against the polished floor. She read over his vitals on the monitor, fingers steady, mind trained. This was what she was good at: order, routine, control. Carefully, she pulled back the sheets and began her work. She changed the bed linens with practiced ease, gently wiped down his skin, and adjusted his foreline with precision. Every touch was professional, clinical. But beneath the surface, something stirred. As days turned into a week, Ivy settled into the rhythm of Knox's care. Mornings spent checking vitals. Afternoons documenting progress, or the lack of it. And somewhere along the way, the silence started to bother her. The machines hummed. The room remained quiet. Always quiet. Too quiet. One afternoon, as she replaced a fresh bandage near his shoulder, Ivy found herself speaking aloud, just a whisper. "You know, you're not exactly a conversationalist." Of course, no answer came. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "They say talking to coma patients can help, though. So, I guess you're stuck with me." From that moment, the silence was no longer something to endure. It became an invitation. Each day, Ivy spoke more about her morning coffee, the odd dream she'd had, the nurse at the station who couldn't stop humming 80s love songs. At first, it was just noise. A way to fill the void. But slowly, it changed. She began to share about her childhood, her brother's obsession with comic books, her fear of thunderstorms, the way she hated hospitals at first, and how strange it was that now, they felt like home. Her voice was soft, steady. The walls of Suite 9C began to hold more than silence. They held memories, confessions, connection. One evening, Ivy sat by the window, her eyes on the darkening sky. Rain tapped against the glass, mirroring the rhythm of the heart monitor. She glanced over at Knox's still form. "You don't know me," she murmured, "but it feels like I've known you forever. Isn't that strange?" There was no response. There never was. But in the stillness, something inside Ivy whispered, "He hears you." And for reasons she couldn't explain, she believed it. Even unconscious, he looked formidable, sharp jawline, high cheekbones, dark hair tousled against the white pillow. A man carved from marble, beautiful and cold. "Well, Mr. Wilder," Ivy murmured, stepping closer. "Looks like it's just you and me now." She didn't know it yet, but stepping into that room would change everything. Forever. It began with a twitch. Barely noticeable. Just the faintest flicker of movement at the tip of Knox's right index finger, as Ivy adjusted his blanket one quiet afternoon. She blinked. Did I imagine that? Her gaze locked onto his hand, breath held. Nothing. The machines continued their steady hum, indifferent to her racing heart. She shook her head, brushing it off as muscle reflex. It happened sometimes, even in deep comas. She'd seen it before. But 3 days later, it happened again. This time, it was his arm. As she gently moved it to change his position, she felt it, a subtle resistance, a tension that hadn't been there before. His bicep flexed, not involuntarily, not like a spasm, but like something, or someone, trying to respond. Ivy leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Knox?" she whispered. "Can you hear me?" No answer. No movement. Still. Her gut told her otherwise. That night, unable to shake the unease, she lingered in his room long after her shift ended. The rain outside had turned into a storm, thunder rumbling in the distance. Ivy moved quietly, dabbing a warm cloth across Knox's face, humming softly under her breath. And then it happened. His hand jerked. Fingers curled. And grabbed her wrist. Ivy gasped, the cloth slipping from her hand as cold shock surged through her. Knox's grip was weak, but deliberate, his fingers pressing against her skin with unmistakable intent. Her heart pounded, blood roaring in her ears. "Knox?" She breathed, voice barely more than a whisper. "Can you hear me?" His eyes remained closed. His chest rose and fell steadily. But his hand, it held hers for a moment longer, then loosened, falling back to the bed. Ivy staggered back, her mind racing. This wasn't random. This wasn't just reflex. She bolted from the room. Minutes later, Dr. Harris stood beside Knox's bed, reviewing the monitors with clinical detachment. Ivy stood close, eyes blazing with urgency. "I'm telling you," he moved. He grabbed my wrist. "This isn't normal, something's changing." Dr. Harris didn't look up. Patients in comas often exhibit motor reflexes. "You know this, Ivy. Don't read too much into it. It wasn't just a twitch." Her voice sharpened. It was intentional. Finally, he met her gaze, expression unreadable. "I appreciate your concern. But there's no neurological evidence of recovery. Let's not give anyone false hope." False hope. The words cut deeper than she expected. Dr. Harris left, his footfalls fading down the corridor, but Ivy remained, staring at Knox's motionless form. "I know what I felt," she whispered, stepping closer, eyes fierce. "And I won't stop until I know the truth." From that moment, she became more vigilant. Every breath, every twitch, every shift of muscle, she watched it all. She spoke to him more often, her voice laced with determination. Because something was happening. And Ivy Quinn was going to be there when the impossible became real. The night was still. Too still. Outside, the storm had quieted, leaving behind a thick, heavy silence that settled over Westbridge Hospital like a shroud. Suite 9C was cloaked in soft shadows, the only sound the steady beeping of machines that had become as familiar to Ivy as her own heartbeat. She moved with practiced ease, dipping the cloth into warm water, wringing it gently before pressing it against Knox's skin. Her hands moved over his arms, careful and gentle, but her mind was elsewhere, wrapped in a strange sense of anticipation she couldn't explain. Something was different tonight. "You'd probably hate this, you know," she murmured, trying to mask the unease creeping up her spine. "Being taken care of. Being seen like this." She paused, glancing at him. "But you're still here, Knox. I can feel it." Her words hung in the air like a fragile thread, and then his hand clamped around her wrist. Not a twitch. Not a reflex. A grip. Strong. Urgent. Ivy froze, the cloth falling from her hand. Her breath caught in her throat, heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at the man who, for a year, had not moved, could not move. "Knox?" She choked, eyes wide. His eyelids fluttered. Once. Twice. And then he opened them. A flood of confusion, fear, and life surged through his gaze, dark eyes scanning the room wildly before locking onto her, filled with something raw and desperate. "Ivy." The word came out hoarse, broken, but it was unmistakable. Her name. From his lips. Ivy stumbled back, nearly tripping over the stool behind her. Her hands trembled as she slammed the emergency button on the wall, her voice cracking. "Code blue. He's awake. He's awake," he spoke. Alarms blared. Footsteps thundered in the corridor. The door burst open as Dr. Harris and a flood of medical staff stormed the room, barking orders, surrounding the bed. But Ivy didn't move. She stood rooted in place, staring into the eyes of the man she had cared for, spoken to, believed in, and now, those eyes stared back. Not empty. Not lost. Alive. And in that moment, nothing would ever be the same again. The days following Knox's awakening passed in a blur of tests, whispers, and disbelief. Dr. Harris stood at the foot of Knox's bed, flipping through chart after chart, his expression unreadable, but his words laced with awe. Neurological responses are stabilizing. Cognitive functions, remarkable. This level of recovery after a year in a coma is unprecedented. Knox barely heard him. His mind was a storm, fragments of memories flashing like broken glass in his skull. He remembered his name, his company, the cold steel of power and the sharpness of betrayal that seemed just out of reach. But everything surrounding the accident was a haze. And then there was Ivy. He watched her move across the room, adjusting his fore, checking his vitals, her voice calm and steady. Her touch familiar, her presence comforting in a way that felt intimate, though he didn't know why. Something deep inside him stirred whenever she was near, a strange, unexplainable certainty that she mattered. That she was more than just a nurse. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the window, Ivy helped him sit upright for the first time. His muscles ached, weak from disuse, but her hands were strong, guiding him with patience. "You're doing great," she said gently, wrapping an arm around his back for support. "Just take it slow." Knox gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his brow as he struggled to keep his balance. "I hate this," he muttered. Ivy smiled softly. "You're allowed to. But you're here, Knox. That's what matters." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He stared at her, something sharp flickering in his chest. "Why do I feel like I know you?" he asked, voice rough. "Like you've always been here." Ivy hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly on his arm. "I've been with you since the beginning," she said quietly. "When no one else stayed, I did." Knox studied her, his eyes searching. There was something in her voice, a weight, a truth unsaid. He wanted to ask more, dig deeper, remember. But the past was slippery. Just out of reach. Still, with every step he took, each painful, deliberate stride with Ivy at his side, Knox Wilder wasn't just rebuilding his strength. He was searching for the pieces of his past. And somehow, he knew Ivy Quinn was the key to it all. The nightmare struck like lightning. Knox jolted awake, drenched in sweat, his breath ragged, eyes wide in the darkness of his room. The echo of screeching tires, shattered glass, and a scream that may have been his own still rang in his ears. He buried his face in his hands, trying to calm the tremors in his chest. Rain. Darkness. A twisting mountain road. His hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white, and then, the brakes. They failed. No resistance. No control. The car spun, and through the blur, a figure stood at the side of the road, motionless. Watching. Not helping. Watching. Ivy rushed in seconds later, alarmed by the monitor's spike. "Knox? What's wrong?" He looked at her, eyes wild. "I saw it. The accident. The brakes, they didn't work. Someone was there. Just standing there, watching me go off the cliff." Ivy's heart pounded. She gripped his hand. "Are you sure?" "I know what I saw." His voice shook, but his conviction was unshakable. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted me dead. The next day, while Knox pushed through his rehabilitation with new fire, Ivy began digging. She had always trusted her instincts, and they screamed that something had been missed. In the hospital's archive room, amid flickering fluorescent lights and rows of dust-coated files, Ivy found it, the official accident report. Most of it was standard procedure. Weather conditions, severe. Vehicle, totaled. Cause, mechanical failure. But one line stopped her cold. Brake system suspected failure due to unknown tampering. Investigation inconclusive. Her fingers trembled. Why hadn't this been pursued further? Heart racing, Ivy dug deeper, cross-referencing police logs, repair shop invoices, financial records. Hours passed before she uncovered something buried, intentionally. A wire transfer. Large? Suspicious. Dated 3 days before the crash. It led to a shell corporation tied to a man with a criminal record, known for arranging accidents for hire. Ivy's stomach clenched. She returned to Knox, who listened in stunned silence as she laid out everything. "Someone paid to sabotage your car," she said, voice low. "And I think I know who." Knox stared out the window, fists clenched. "Nathan." The name dripped with venom. Nathan Wilder. His half-brother. The black sheep of the family turned self-serving investor, always second to Knox, second in power, second in inheritance, second in everything. And now, a would-be killer. Knox's voice was a growl. He's always wanted what I had. He couldn't beat me. So he tried to erase me. He turned to Ivy, eyes blazing. "I won't let him win." The library of the Wilder estate was steeped in shadows, the flickering firelight casting dancing patterns on dark mahogany shelves lined with ancient books and forgotten secrets. Knox stood tall near the hearth, his cane steady in his right hand, strength slowly returning to his legs, but tonight, it was rage that held him upright. Ivy was beside him, calm but alert, a folder of damning documents clutched tightly in her hands. The heavy doors creaked open. Nathan Wilder strolled in, smug as ever, his tailored suit crisp, his smirk razor-sharp. "Knox," he drawled, spreading his arms. "I heard you've made a miraculous recovery. Quite the comeback. Almost makes me believe in fate." Knox didn't move. His eyes, dark and cold, followed Nathan like a predator tracking prey. "You sabotaged my car." Nathan's expression didn't flinch. Instead, he chuckled, laughed, as if it were all a joke. "You always were quick, brother. But not quick enough that night, were you? I have to admit, I didn't think you'd live. Yet, here you are. Clinging on like a bad habit." Ivy's voice cut through the room, sharp and steady. "You paid someone to tamper with the brakes. We traced the money. We have the evidence." Nathan turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "Ah, the nurse. Or should I say, the watchdog. Always by his side, always watching. Tell me, does he know what you're worth?" Knox stepped forward, fury burning through his veins. "She's worth more than you'll ever be. And your game is over." Nathan's eyes darkened. He turned, ready to leave, the facade cracking. But the front door slammed open. Voices. Footsteps. Badges gleaming under the chandelier. "Nathan Wilder, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted manslaughter." The color drained from Nathan's face. "You set me up." Knox's voice was low, lethal. "No. You set yourself up. I just gave justice a chance to catch up." Nathan lunged, but officers restrained him, dragging him from the room, cursing and snarling until his voice faded into the night. Silence fell. Knox stood still, chest heaving, as if a weight had finally lifted after a year of torment. Ivy reached for his hand, and for the first time, he let himself exhale. Justice. Finally. Weeks had passed since Nathan's arrest. The shadows that once loomed over the Wilder estate had finally begun to lift, replaced by something unfamiliar but welcome: peace. Knox stood on the rooftop terrace of the mansion, overlooking the city bathed in the warm hues of twilight. The sky was ablaze with streaks of gold and crimson, and the breeze carried the scent of blooming roses from the garden below. Beside him, Ivy leaned against the railing, her eyes on the horizon, unaware of the storm of emotions swirling inside him. She had given him more than a second chance at life, she had given him hope. And now, he was ready to give her everything. Knox turned to her, heart pounding not with fear, but with certainty. "Ivy." She looked at him, smiling. "What is it?" Before she could ask more, he dropped to one knee. Her breath caught. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box and opened it slowly. Inside, a ring glistened in the fading light, delicate yet timeless, just like her. His eyes locked onto hers, voice low, full of emotion. "You didn't just save my life, Ivy. You saved me. You brought me back when I didn't even know I was lost. I don't know when it started. All I know is that I can't imagine a future without you. I love you. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." Ivy's eyes filled with tears, her hand trembling as she covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Then, without hesitation, she whispered through the tears, "Yes. 1,000 times, yes." Knox rose, slipping the ring onto her finger, then pulling her into his arms. Their kiss under the setting sun wasn't just the start of something new, it was the culmination of every moment they had survived, every challenge they had conquered. Together. The garden of the Wilder estate glowed beneath strings of golden lights and soft candle flames. Petals lined the aisle, guests whispered in awe, and music drifted on the evening breeze. Ivy stood at the end of the aisle, radiant in a white gown that shimmered like stardust. Her eyes locked with Knox's, standing beneath the arbor, his expression filled with love and gratitude. As she walked toward him, every step felt like coming home. Their vows were simple, heartfelt. "I choose you," Knox whispered, voice thick with emotion. "In darkness and light, in silence and in song, I choose you." Tears shimmered in Ivy's eyes. "And I choose you." Again and again. Always. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the applause rang out like a hymn of joy. Knox kissed Ivy with a passion only born from nearly losing everything, and finding it again in her arms. That night, hand in hand, they walked beneath a sky painted in twilight hues, the air filled with laughter, music, and the promise of forever. Against all odds, through coma and betrayal, darkness and fear, they had found each other. And nothing would tear them apart again. Love is not just about finding someone. It's about holding on, through the silence, through the storms, through every moment that tries to break you. It's about choosing each other, again and again. Not when it's easy, but when it's hard. Not in perfection, but in truth. Not just in life, but in the fight for it. Because in the end, love isn't just about surviving. It's about healing. Together,